Hello, welcome to the Square Base Show. In this phenomenal episode where we return to the airwaves, we are going to be giving you some of the results of the big Square Base survey. It's not what it's called.
Ooh, I don't know. You had a banger thumbnail, and I just used that retroactively as the title of it. It's the massive Warhammer, the Old World Survey, brought to you by Squarebase.
Yeah. Okay. So that's super exciting. We're going to be going through that in a rapid fire succession. So hello to everyone. Listen, we're not too far away from Adepticon reveals for Beastmen, Val. I'm excited about that.
I guess that probably, and we will probably be there. We will be there.
We will be there, which is very exciting.
Are we going to go?
Yeah, we're going to go.
You want to go?
Yeah, we were also away last week. Val had some. Val was on halls, but I need you to know I've been writing some scripts, some content. So you're going to see some even new and interesting stuff over the next couple of weeks, as maybe also a new Old World show coming from us as well. So lots to talk about, loads of stuff, but that's not for today, because today we are going to be rapid firing through some hot news. And also some stuff that I'm hoping is going to really make a lot of grey matter tingle. There's going to be a lot of data analysts out there who are excited. A lot of people are going to be like, oh. So get ready for this information because it's going to be fun. Val, you've got some hot news for us?
Absolutely, I do. I was teasing some events earlier. First of all, I just want to say the Squarebase GT Warhammer the Resurrection on Easter weekend sold out.
Oh, amazing. That's incredible.
So that's pretty cool, and really excited for that. But that's neither here nor there, because we're going to talk about some other sellouts, and that's what's coming up. It's a partnership that I've engaged with, we're engaging with a little group called Green Banner Events. They are not headed. It's a group of 4 gamers out in California. And Green Banner put on some pretty epic events, specifically the Challengers Cup, which I think is one of the largest 40K team events going these days. I think it started up about 2 years ago. Kicker, formerly of Frontline Gaming, joined up with these guys, and he's the event organizer with them now as well. But I didn't just go into bed with them based only on Kicker, because he is a killer. The other 3 partners in this are really great, really aligned, and actually huge Old World fans. Like a lot of people, as we're going to find out in the survey, they play 40K because they couldn't play Fantasy, and that's fantastic. And they really, really, really wanted to bring Old World into their events, and they have a series of events coming up this year that Old World will be at. And we're going to have a Squarebase formatted, fully designed and run by us event. At their San Diego Classic, which is going to be it's just a regular GT size, 30-ish people. That's in May 17th through 18th. And then also in the hometown of Kicker at their, I believe it's called maybe it's the Mountain West Classic. No, it's the Utah Cup. There you go. In August 23rd through 24th. That's going to be a larger one. That's the Utah Cup. But the big one, the one that I will definitely be at, and I will hopefully drag Rob to as well, is the California Cup. It's their crown jewel. That's why we're going to run events in advance of it, really tweak the format, make sure we have everything ties. West Coast, Best Coast. It's in Los Angeles. I think that's kind of like saying that Mississauga is Toronto in my world, but it's adjacent to or very near Los Angeles. It's by the other airport. It's at a very large, very nice venue. That's California Cup, and that is the weekend of November 16th, coming up in 2025. So I think we're going back to Cali, Rob.
That's exciting. I got to say, from a personal point of view, helping tournaments and tournament organizers around the world, also helping players realize that there's going to be some sort of standardization at events and something that makes sense, something where they're like, okay, this is cool. This is a fun idea, especially as we're in the workshop of coming up with like things like the Riverlands event, as an example, and other stuff that we could do in the future. It gives us an opportunity to not just talk about it on the internet, but an opportunity to be able to like let people take part in that without traveling all the way to a little venue in Nottingham, right? Like they can go over to Toronto now we're going to take over the East Coast of America, which is cool. West Coast of America. Wow. Hey, East Coast, we're coming.
East Coast, I've got. East Coast minds. All right.
Okay.
So the other cool thing too is that they're just, I don't know. I was really interested once I actually talked to them. I was very much not interested before, and they're just incredibly enthusiastic. I feel a lot of that passion that I do when we talk about events that we run, and they're really committed to player experience, which I hope is something that we try and shoot for at our events. I know it's certainly something you achieve at yours. So anyway,
Vibes.
really excited.
That's what we're doing. 2025.
Vibes are going to be good.
The Square Base Show is giving out vibes, and I hope you can pick up on it, chat. That's what we're hoping for. Vibes. Vibes and energy.
Anyway, that's the big announcement, Rob. And a very important part of this is tickets for the Square-based event at the California Cup. That's the big one in November. Those will go on sale next week, 11 a.m. PST on Thursday. So we'll get another show in before those go live. But just a little bit of hype to wet the whistles and have everyone check their calendars and see, hey, could I possibly be in California at that time? If you want to see some details about the events, you can go to greenbannereventco.com and check it out there, although tickets will not yet be up.
No, good. All right, excellent. I'm excited about that. That's fun. More people playing, as has been the point of the show, more people playing Old World, more people making friends, more people hanging out with people, playing games has been literally the point of our show. So shout out to the Green Crew, and shout out to Val for organizing. So we love that. We want more of that, okay? Which is cool. But in other news, there's one other little quick bit of news which we'll cover in another show. Actually, we'll do that on another show. They put out a quick tournament format. Games Workshop did a free PDF, 500-point games. Loving it. We'll break that down in another video. That'll be fun because we're going to start going through the massive Warhammer Old World survey. Val, before we get into this, quick TLDR for people who've just joined us and maybe didn't check in on the show where we talked about doing this. You did, based to make sure that I've got this right, just off the Square, the SBOT, which is an online tournament. You did a feedback form. And you got a bunch of information from people. And then we talked about it on the show, and I was like, this would be cool. I think you said, or we said, or whatever it was.
Definitely you.
Okay. we said it would be cool to find out what everyone thinks. And then you put it together, and then we shed it out in the world. And now you're going to start breaking down the info about what we got shown and what we've learned, which is super exciting. How many people did we have involved in this? Like, what's the situation with that?
So yeah, it's a treasure trove of information. I got to say, it is very long. We're probably gonna crack the top third of it, I'd say, of all the stuff that's in it today. So we'll look at some demographics and things. And we got response from 4,420 people on the number. And that is actually, that's actually, I think, a very good sample of what I would say are the engaged players, like people who are, into Old World enough to watch our show or to be on Reddit or Discords or talking with people who are into the game, people who give enough, who care enough about what's going on with Old World to be actually actively looking into it because they would have had to have seen the survey. So a lot of things like this is a voluntary survey out to the general population. So it's going to be representative, I'd say, of your most engaged population. And then to give some other frames of reference, like, in the last 3 months or so of our show, we've had around 40,000 unique viewers who've come in and watched more than one program. When you look at the biggest Facebook groups, they hit around 40,000. Reddit gets bigger than that. I think they're in their 70s or 80,000s maybe, but that's actually a Warhammer Fantasy group. So it's actually probably got a lot of people from the olden days.
Back in the day.
That is all to say that I think it's not unreasonable to think that it's actually a very good sample of the people who are actually participating in Old World. So that's, but it's not going to be representative of anyone who's checked out. Obviously, we weren't doing a national phone survey here to get a real proper random sample.
I tried, but you wouldn't let me. You said stop cold calling people.
Just stop cold calling people.
I was Jane Silent Bobbing it. I had a sheet of paper. I was knocking on people's doors. I was like, you're in a Facebook group for the Old World. What do you think? All right, so take us from the top. Our first slide. Do you want to take us, talk to us about what we're seeing here?
Absolutely. I think number one thing about the Old World when it was dropping was that it was just going to be for old people, and this was a concern of mine as well. That it would be people who skewed heavily towards the top end of the gamer age pyramid. However, on our survey of our respondents, we see an excellent distribution, a large cohort, if you will, in that 25 to 34. So basically 25 to 44. I think 82% of respondents were in that section of people, and then 10% in the 45 to 54.
Okay, all right. So interesting. So over 45, we're looking at like 12%. And then under 44, you're looking at like the biggest swath of our audience. But I guess the big news, which we talked about yesterday, is the fact that 39% of that, or no, that's not right, 42% of the audience is like sub 34%. Now, it's important to note that if you are gracefully entering the over 44 bracket, it's important to remember that this does not mean that who you are and what you are is not important. What this does mean, though, that, well, I don't know if this is what you think. My takeaway from it, I guess we should both talk about our takeaways, is that we've got a game that is growing in a younger group, and they will continue to play for a long time. And that is really good for establishing like the health of a game, right? Like it's a lot of what gets talked about in computer games. How many concurrent players are currently playing computer game right now? How many people are in the old world right now? 42% of those people being under 44 is pretty great.
Yeah.
So under 34, under 34.
I think it's kind of cool that, there's 5% in the 18 to 24 bracket at all. And that they actually outnumber the oldest brackets. So that's pretty cool. And also, I think it would be interesting to see what the distribution would be for a game like AOS or 40K, just because I suspect it'd be similar, to be honest with you. I would think that it would almost be the same. I think, just knowing from my own personal experience, when you have the time in your sort of teens and the interest, you may not have the funds to be able to participate in this. It's an expensive, like you have income, kind of a hobby to have. And then once you start making income, you probably don't have as much time or necessarily the interest when you're, into your 20s. And then, once you sort of settle down or, have a little more consistency, I noticed, like, for example, when I started playing 40K, I looked around, it felt like everyone was me. Like everyone had sort of like got to a spot in life and they were like, okay, now I can finally go buy the army that I always wanted. You know what I mean? And I think that's a sort of a common thing, that the hobby in general is quite aspirational. And so like when you actually have the ability to like go through and follow through and do it, you're probably a little bit older. And so as a result, I think this would be representative of other games too. And the other thing is it's incredibly millennial. But that again might just be the timing of it. We can talk about the potential tabletop games bubble that I think is related to millennials.
This is an entire tight 10 to 20 minute conversation here. And I think we should do that. I think we should move. We're going to do another video about that. There's loads more to talk about, so we will move through it. But that itself is worth an entire conversation, which I'd love to break down. So we will do that, but we'll do that in the fullness of time. Next up, countries. Top 10 countries. I guess this is based on skill. What is this based on?
Well, did Poland make the top 10? It did. When we started talking about like gamer types and stuff, Poland is wild. It jumps off the charts as far as its metric. So again, just some sample bias here. Obviously, this was an English, this was an English survey directed mostly at English speakers, and so it's going to sample a lot from those countries. But I think we see here something that probably isn't too surprising, which is that the United States and the United Kingdom both share. I didn't learn how to put the percentages on this chart yet, but they both share. Around here, I have to pull it up. But we'll call it 25% each of the total player base, give or take, and then the rest is divided up kind of amongst the Commonwealth and Europe. There were, I think that's actually in the next one. Actually, is the regions. But yes, you do see here, Canada, Australia, Germany, Poland, Sweden, Spain, Netherlands, France. Australia and Canada are above places like Germany, Poland, Sweden, Spain. But I would highly bet that there are far, far more players from there. They just didn't engage with this particular survey.
Yeah, I'd say one of the things that has become very common in the wargaming space is actually that there are tons and tons of more wargamers in the English isn't a first language countries, but they just obviously operate fully inside of their own country. We know that there are even I think the Spanish are using a fan-made interpretation of the Old World rulebook to play. The Spanish or the Italians, one of the two, maybe both, because obviously there wasn't a version of it produced by Games Workshop, so one of them just translated it and changed it, which, as we know, there's already a lot of interpretation in that book already.
Amazing.
Imagine translating it. And then we also know that when you look at things like online streams, or if you look at wargaming conventions, one of the biggest 40K conventions in the world is in Spain.
That's right,
as an example. So there's actually, I'm not surprised to see this distribution as we see it. I'm just expecting that actually you're going to see a much larger group of people, just like you said, in those populations. We're just not seeing them responding to an English language survey.
Exactly. Yeah. And maybe if I got out my Google Translate a little bit more and actually put this in places where that maybe more of those gamers would have seen it, maybe we get more of a response. But even still, like there's enough here to draw some some assumptions about some of those folks. And of course, they're English speakers too. They just may not be looking in the same places as we are. Okay, I think the next one is regional.
Yeah,
I think the next one is. Here we go. So this sort of breaks it down more into bigger buckets. And here you see just like the UK combined with all of the European countries that responded, massive slice. It's 60%. North America at 33%, and then basically the rest of the world coming in very small. However, just want to shout out the 22 South Americans and 9 Africans. Who did complete the survey, because I didn't want them to be fully shut out. And I think there was 44 respondents from countries in Asia as well.
Shout out to my guys in Durban. I know you're an active community, so love you to bits. This is, again, very interesting info. And also Asia is one of those really interesting countries, especially I see this in most of the games, or the tabletop games, where we're seeing that kind of big, not resurgence, that big push of Bandai and their Gunpla games into the Europe and North American markets. It's been a long time held hope of Games Workshop specifically, but miniature wargaming people definitely to push over into kind of those Asian and those countries, obviously massive markets and demographics, but they've always struggled. And I guess in many ways, tabletop war games, tabletop miniatures has for a long time been generational. Like your dads did it, someone in your family did it, you learned it as a kid. There was those initial stores. And now obviously with mass media like Space Marine 2 and stuff like that, I'm assuming we're going to see bigger upticks in these areas which aren't down the traditional wargaming marketing routes, which will be super interesting to see. This doesn't surprise me as is, but I think 20, 40 years, this will change quite drastically. And that Asian number could go up very fast. Very fast.
And just like on the individual countries thing, like the sample bias is going to be towards
English speakers,
the people, and also the people who watch the content, who saw the posts, and so I think that's probably more what we're seeing here. Moreover, that split between the sort of North America versus Europe, I think there's a common conception that fantasy was more popular in Europe and the UK, and I think that does play out in this. And I think we see a little bit more of that as we go along too.
Yeah. Okay. Respondees who are feeling it. Ooh, what have we got here?
Feeling it. So this is basically testing the engagement level of people who are answering about the survey. And so it was simply, was Warhammer the Old World the game that you engaged the most with? And so on this survey again, 65% of the respondents said yes. So again, this is a lot of the highly motivated people just sort of identifying that. Of that group, that does say to me that, of the people watching content, of the people, posting in these places, the old world has become, their favorite game, one of the ways that they spend their time. And that's only in 1 year. That's pretty impressive.
That's really impressive. That's very impressive. And again, I'm assuming that's going to be growth. And if for some people, it's their first war game or their first war game back. I mean, a life-defining moment the first time you walk into your local gaming store or Warhammer store and you say, I might do this. And you look around and then you pick up, you start collecting 40K box, you start collecting your 80 box, or you pick up your old world box now, which is an option for people, which previously it wasn't. That pretty much can determine your life path for a long time.
That's absolutely correct. I think there should probably be people with pamphlets outside of game stores, just being like, "Are you sure you want to go into this game store?" Make sure that if you go down this path, it's a deep rabbit hole with no bottom. So I'm not surprised that people are super into it, but it was great to see in a little data point.
For sure, that's cool. Hypeness level.
This was something I was very, very curious about. This slide itself probably represented 30 minutes of me being incredibly upset because for whatever reason, the percentage of people who stated that their passion for the old world has increased would not populate on the bloody pie chart. But that's all right. I don't know why it was. But yeah, 70% of all respondents said that actually in the last year, they have gotten more excited about the old world and what's coming for it and all that kind of stuff. And then more importantly, only 8% said that it declined. So yes, we're talking to the people who obviously are engaged and excited about the game, but the fact that it has captured their attention, and not only that, but they've gotten more into it as time has gone on. That was something I was really, really curious about. Especially, there's a long wait for certain armies to come out. There's been the bit of the, once you get into it, how do you actually like the rules? Does it play in a way that you enjoy? So it's cool that the interest has not only been sustained, but that it is actually people are becoming more interested, more committed to it.
Interesting. I like I like that you gave us a nod there. 73, like 70% of respondents are more hype, but 73% of listeners, Squarebase listeners, are more hype versus 63% of non-listeners. That's right. The haters are worse than the non-haters. All right. Okay.
I think this just speaks to the power of our enthusiasm, Rob. If you listen, you're going to get more hyped. I think it's probably mostly the song at the beginning, but very important data point there. I just, again, this was one. I don't know why. I guess because we spend a lot of time doing the show, playing the game, and I think a lot of time people always want to know, like, are people playing it? Are they interested in it? Do they want to do it? And again, categorically here, people are playing it as their main game, and they are getting more into it as time goes on. Those are very healthy signals.
Yeah, very helpful. Yeah, I think the fact that it has increased is actually a really big conversation point. Like, why? What's happened? Like,
true.
Like that's because you and me, past couple of Arcane Journals, we've not been that hype about. We've both been like, I think that's been a little bit despondent, but maybe it's because people are like, actually, my army has come out now. I was excited, but actually, Empire's out now. That's my army. I don't really care how it plays because I was waiting for it to come out. High Elves have come out. I was waiting for that to come out. So this kind of like, maybe we look back on this and the decision not to release everything all at the same time and instead to slow grow the community and the people maybe was, if not frustrating and awkward, was actually sensible and did increase that hype level. It's a great conversation point as well.
Yeah, and I think as people who've been engaged from the beginning, because one thing to keep in mind is they actually did release everything at the same time. So like for us, or for people who have armies on the shelves and things like that, we've been playing the High Elves Grand Army for almost a year, right? So we're looking to that Arcane Journal to really give us some extra kick or flavor. But for someone who is waiting to make the entry into the game until High Elves came out, it's all new to them, right? Like it's all gravy, right? And also they didn't have the chance to actually go out and buy those models that they maybe wanted. So yeah, I think I think the incremental releases are definitely playing a role. There we go. That's the word.
So our next slide is the surprising amount of new players. Did you play Warhammer Fantasy? The answer, yes, 70%, but no, 23%. Interesting. And 40% of the new players come from the 18 to 34% cohort. And then 31% of North American players are also new to Fantasy.
Yeah. So like overall, again, that one speaks to that thing about, there's just a lot more like players who were into Fantasy in sort of Europe. In North America, though, they skew like there's more new players to the game that hadn't played previously. I don't know. Some people might look at this and be like, "Oh, only 23% of people are new players." Why is that? Why is that surprising? I think that's insane. Personally, I think that is a massive number for a game that was actively marketed as not for new people.
Intentionally in every article.
Like actively dissuaded you from doing that. A game that is, I mean, all Warhammer is difficult to get into. All tabletop gaming is not for the faint of heart. But, like as far as a game to enter into, you're stepping back 10 years in the style of rules writing, all kinds of stuff. There is a lot of barriers to entry to any war game.
Also, fair to say, the miniature releases were trying to trigger a lot of remember berries, right? Like, remember these, you remember these, you remember these.
Yeah, it's supposed to be all nostalgia, yeah.
Yeah, all nostalgia. So, like, new people getting nostalgia kicks, even, if, like, and we'll talk about that in a minute, like, because Total War and etc. Even, like, them getting the remember berries not necessarily driving you in. Those miniatures are not shit hot. They're fine. In some cases, they're good, all the way to garbage, looking at you, at you, yeoman. Cavalry, but like, so like, that's a pretty big deal, especially like modern prices, the wealth disparity in the world, because billionaires suck, like hashtag Bast. Like, so like, there's a lot of issues really to not encourage new players and younger people to engage in an expensive hobby. So that's actually a massive number. I agree with you. That's shocking.
Yeah. And I would say, too, something to think about is in that 18 to 34 cohort, they are, the oldest person in that cohort when Fantasy ended was 24, because it ended 2015. So that's a cohort of people who maybe they did walk into the shop and were like, I want to go and do that. And this is something we've spoken about in the past. But then when they turned, or got to a place in their life where they went back to the shop to go and buy the army they wanted, it wasn't there. The game didn't exist. So like now there is that opportunity for like a big group of players to actually engage in the game that appeal to them the most, the sort of the more traditional fantasy setting.
Also, yeah. I mean, also we talk about this loads, but also you've got like either like 40K will have dragged a ton of people in, and Games Workshop's seen an exponential growth over the last 7 to 8 years. Well, more like 9 years now, actually. But they've seen a huge exponential growth in their like market share. How many people are engaging with their stuff? Like all their numbers are up. Ludicrous numbers. 20% sales increase alone, which like last 6 months of 2024 over. They're already massive increases year on year before that is nutty numbers. So, people have come in and you've got a new audience to sell this other stuff to now. I was going to say older stuff, but still. So they're
new old stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. New old stuff. Yeah.
This is actually, so I have some regrets, which is that I didn't ask any follow-up questions at all about new players. Like, if you hadn't played Fantasy before, why are you playing it now? Where did you come from? Because I assumed that this would answer the question. Because my hypothesis was clearly any new players were just super into Warhammer Total War. And yes, that is true. But it's actually true for everyone. Something like 73% of players who answered this survey also played Total War. And so Warhammer Total War, obviously a grand strategy game for the PC, which really brings the world to life. It's just incredible. It is what I would assume to be the equivalent to Dawn of War, but for Warhammer Fantasy. was of course released in a period of time where Warhammer Fantasy did not exist. It came out a year after they did the End Times. I expected when I went to new players to see what their correlation of playing Total War was, to be like way ahead of the general player group, and really only 5% more of new players played Total War than just players that had previously played Fantasy. So there are some people who definitely were onboarded through Total War. That indicates to me, but it doesn't feel like it's necessarily the thing. I guess 77% of new players did play Total War, but it's like everybody played Total War. So I find that kind of interesting.
Yeah, I still think it's probably our number one push into getting people into the tabletop game, which obviously, like Games Workshop, obviously Creative Assembly would have paid money to Games Workshop for the license, but then they're seeing that back now in money through miniatures and books and paints and stuff. So like that collaborative, but 77% is pretty high. I'm guessing the other 23% just don't have computers. That's kind of my hot take.
There is like a definite decrease in the amount of players. Like, of course, they also underrepresent in general. Like, so as you get older, the less likely you are to have played Total War. So once you get in the 55 set, only like half of them had played Total War, and then even lower still in the tippy top bracket. So it's definitely in the majority cohort. But like when you look into the millennial set, it's like 80%. It's crazy how much penetration Total War has on this player base. And I guess I expected something like that, but it's crazy how high it is.
Yeah, it's I'm not surprised. And as I clearly screamed at the camera over 2 years ago now, I was like, it's going to be huge, and they're like, what? I was like, why? I was like, okay.
And Total War probably it definitely kept flames alive. It allows you to engage with lore, and again, just like artwork, it does world building.
Vermintide was also a big game system as well, like another IP.
Well, it's something I could have asked but didn't. But just to answer, like everyone who answered, 70% of people own all 3 Total Wars. So for those in chat right now who are saying like, yeah, I bought it but I never played it. Yeah, maybe, but like if 70% bought all 3, that's a pretty big commitment level, I'd say, overall to that franchise.
What's up next? What matters most?
So this is just sort of an interesting indicator. We did essentially a 1 to 5 scale on these questions and had everyone answer them. And we can later on, we'll do a little bit of, not in this episode, but maybe in the future. And we can do some analysis on how this thing correlates to other tastes and preferences. But essentially, I took the people who answered at like high conviction for these things. And this is actually of all of the people who answered 4 or 5 on these. So there's some with some very, very high marks. So like building and painting for 80% of people is a very, very important thing. The quality of the rules and gameplay, incredibly important thing. Over 80% of people answered 4 or 5 in their list of priorities. And then from there, you see a little bit of a dip. So like the lore. So I guess the actual background of it wasn't as high conviction. And then again, a little bit of a downtick again as you get into the more, the writing army lists aspect of things. Something I think that is really cool to key off of is like discussing the hobby with others, which I use as sort of a maybe in my mind, I view that as sort of a placeholder for the social aspect of it. How important and intrinsic is it? Like, can you, like, certainly the people engaging online are probably more social about things, and they're not the ones in their basement just painting away in silence. But I just don't generally feel like that's the way these games work. These games aren't really like solitary things; they are social games, and that's what I see from there. And then, much like the new players number, pretty blown away by the amount of people that put a high priority on attending events here. 25% almost. I think it was 23. Is a pretty high slice, considering I think most people would discount, events, tournaments, going out and playing. as probably a very, very small piece. That's not a small piece. That's a significant chunk of this particular sample, and impressed me. I was thinking that would be a number around 10%, 5%.
I would have thought
so that's
5. I would
pretty
have, I would have thought 5%. I think in some cases, like especially attending events, is aspirational. Like the concept of
Mhm.
attending an event maybe is something people are excited about, but like maybe not even necessarily going to do. And I think Games Workshop specifically, Old World specifically, but also like a bunch of other event organizers, and it's why the success of something like Adepticon is so prevalent, is because
Mhm.
actually some people were smart enough to be like, let's make events where you could just come and talk about the hobby. Like, versus having to play. Like the concept of going to play a tournament, the convention concept is like, and an old world convention would be a really cool thing to go and attend, like as an idea. Like, and I'm sure there's a lot of people. If I said, "Do you want to attend a tournament? Would you like to attend an old world convention?" I think the old world convention numbers would be much higher than I want to attend a tournament. Like, to be honest, like a celebration of the hobby.
You might call it a games day, if you will.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be interesting if someone did something like that? That would be incredibly popular and successful.
Who knows?
Strange.
You'll never do it. I'll never do it. Also, I think one of the things that is successful about the old world, and we'll continue to see people be excited about and engage with it, especially online, is that list writing is complex. List writing is diverse and has got lots of like different strings to it. You could do a lot with list writing,
Yes.
which I think, shout out to the game designers if they ever listen. You need to keep the amount of options almost dizzying, which is going to sound a bit odd because the modern Games Workshop is like less options, make it simple, make it easy to play. But ultimately, I actually think that if I come up with a really cool way to build a Black Orc on a Wyvern, like a cool loadout, and I share that with you, then that's really exciting. If there's only one way to build, or if there's no way to customize the Black Orc on Wyvern, I never do it. I never explain it to you. They need to, and you can see that in there, like writing army lists is really high. Like, and I wouldn't be surprised if writing army lists and discussing hobby with others are almost one for one.
Almost the same thing.
Yeah, like oh, I came with an idea. What do you think? And then everyone talks about it, even if it's to say it's rubbish.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot going on in chat right now about like the concept of the hobby being aspirational. And you even mentioned it too about going to events as an aspiration. And something I think that maybe has been lost or maybe undervalued is how a lot of the, playing the game is just tinkering with lists, like writing them up, dreaming up an army, which then leads you to buy a bunch of stuff. Army list writing drives so much of the engagement in the game. And yeah, I don't know how much the people who make these games maybe understood that with a really strong focus on simplicity. And obviously, the 40K is working. Like AOS, I'm pretty sure people are still playing. But that drive to simplicity we've talked about in previous shows does lose something. You're trading off something to get that. And it's something that I think that Old World has in really awesome ways.
And I think it's going to be a driving factor of its success.
I think so too.
Most recent edition.
So this was just trying to get an idea of like, I think again, how was the marketing for the game coded? It was, I think, very targeted at, your 6th edition fan base. And I was also curious to see like how many people remained engaged with other versions of the game. Unfortunately, we lost Warhammer Armies Project. I believe it was 9% at the top there. That's sort of that burgundy looking one next to the 9th Age. So this is the most recent edition that you played. So you have 8th edition at 45%. So half of the cohort made it to the end of official Warhammer Fantasy, and then like 15 to 20% continued playing sort of substitutes for that between 9th Age and Warhammer Armies Project. So things that were very Warhammer-y, they continued playing. And then you can look back to like 6th and 7th edition. There was some degree of drop-off in those, but maybe not as stark or dramatic as I might have imagined given the reputation 8th edition had.
Yeah. I'm not surprised by this. I think 8th edition people wanted to play. They're back. They're ready to rock. I mean, Ninth Age having 8% is still great. Like that's cool. 6th edition, super popular. And you know, you're seeing them in there. Like these all make sense numbers wise, right?
Yeah, no, I think this is actually fully. I would actually agree with you that the amount of people who actually were playing and engaged with Ninth Age and Warhammer Armies Project, that was impressive to me. That there was that sizable amount of players out there, and if this is representative of all players, it's interesting to think of how much of a player base those games had, continue to have.
It's also quite interesting that like you have over time. Like you do wonder where like Games Workshop's involvement in the old world coming back, it could have gone, because obviously like with Blood Bowl, we saw the Blood Bowl community before Games Workshop returned it in 2016, maybe
16.
Yeah, 2016. They had a huge community that was just like building and growing and developing its own platform. Like, you know, that took 20 years for it to happen. It's a smaller game. It's easy to get into, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But like Ninth Age being 8% and Warhammer Fantasy Project being, do you say it was 9%?
I think it was slightly ahead of Ninth Age.
So 17% of people who were actively involved in like square-based combats, you know, and we didn't throw in like, did you play Kings of War as an example, as an option, and things like that? Like, so ranked and flanked games, specifically in the fantasy setting, maintained a popular percentage even without Games Workshop involvement, and it would have been interesting to see where that went long term.
Yeah, and I think as with all of this, right, the pie that you were starting with in 2015, they killed it because they thought it was too small. But really what was going on is that Games Workshop was too small-minded with how they were marketing, supporting, and producing their games.
Yeah.
When they changed their mentality about how they approached their business, the lines and the games that they did offer exploded in popularity massively. Like, just it was nuts to watch it as it was happening. I mean, you were in the building. I was watching as an outsider. It was crazy to me how the second they just threw a match on that garbage bin of oily rags that was interacting with your customers and doing some things that would make them happy, it just blew up. And if fantasy had existed, there's no reason to think that it also wouldn't have had a lift from the way that Games Workshop started doing stuff, despite them still being a perplexing, confounding, and frustrating company. You don't know what it was like. Well, hell, it was the type of company that would blow up a very active and engaged base instead of figuring out why it wasn't working.
The marketing meeting I was in, where I explained that we should put videos on Facebook, mind blowing. What? Why?
To quote Jay and Silent Bob, what the fuck is the internet?
They were like, why would we do that? I was like, okay.
Guys.
All right, guys. What made you stop playing? The end times, 44%, baby.
This was my favorite answer on the entire survey. The end times, obviously. When they killed the game, idiot. So yeah, 44% of players in this stopped playing with the end times. But the other thing that's super interesting and I think goes to also what we were just talking about, the fact that the game stopped existing, was that life stage changed. So maybe you got into your university, early career years, and you had to stop. When you came back, the game didn't exist. That happened for 40K. 40K, when you came back, suddenly 40K was like better than it had ever been, whereas fantasy was non-existent. The thing that was interesting to me was how few of these players, and again, I guess these are the most engaged players, didn't identify 8th edition, 7th edition, which is where you see a lot of frustration online about how the game developed over the years. It didn't seem to be the biggest factor. The biggest factor seemed to literally just be that they stopped making it, or that just on a personal level, that it wasn't something that fit into someone's life anymore.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, the fact that they kept playing, I think, is interesting. Also, like, as discussed a million times, the most successful and most engaged the audience ever were during the end times, where they were giving out content.
Sure.
And, they're a really bad company, understanding how to do things.
Yes.
But yeah, well, I guess also fair to say that the end times wasn't the reason that anyone stopped. In fact, actually, I would argue that the end times content that was released before the end of the game was the most engaged element of Warhammer Fantasy Battles' life, where it had the most people playing, it was the most engaging, so where most people were discussing stuff, and it was only the discontinuation of the game, really, right? That was the end times was the best bit, really, kind of.
Well, yeah, and I mean, if you look at the end times as like in the future, like Games Workshop has constant releases. We're talking about how like, oh man, we only have 6 books out or whatever. Actually, no, what, 8 books now, 7 books out, and it's been a year. Well, it took them a year to release the first army book of 8th edition. So they released 8th edition in the summer, and it was March when Orcs and Goblins come out. That's nuts. But like that's the release pace that they had. End Times was a flurry. Like it was and new models, constant new models, new books, crazy stuff happening all the time. And yeah, of course people got excited. And one of the most tragic things you could ever do is go back and listen to podcasts from that era, because you hear the excitement level and then they get the last book. And it is just like, I understand why people reacted the way they did, because it was just such an emotional letdown. And yeah, as we can see, like that is, and there was actually a follow-up question of this that I don't think I included on this, but I think it was somewhere around 40% of players said that actually led them to stop engaging at all with Games Workshop. So yeah, it was 44% of players said, did the end times specifically lead you to stop engaging with current release GW games? And they said yes. So not only did they lose fantasy players, like they just lost customers entirely from doing that.
Yeah, but like, and as much as everyone's going to be like, haha, they lost customers, just need you to know that from that point, the year after which was the first release of Age of Sigmar, they saw a massive decline, but they fired people. Well, they grandfathered people out of the business. They got a marketing department. And from that point onwards, they've seen nothing but basically exponential growth for nearly a decade, becoming a FTSE 100 company and making cash money. So
there's something to be said about the fact that the disaster that of the Warhammer Fantasy into Age of Sigmar transition, the absolute disaster, is why Games Workshop exploded.
Yeah, because it's the first time they ever had to look at their business and say, how do we make a business work? They looked at it once, they did that, they've not changed since in 10 years.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
They were like, we're going to do this.
And it's working.
And it's working. Exactly. And I think the only thing that's made them change since has been external threats. I think maybe the biggest external threat, but not an external threat, really was the Astartes video on YouTube.
That's fascinating.
It was like, if you take a moment to think about that, like that's a video essay, right? Like they looked at it. Very good point. The numbers were insane. People were reacting to it who were not even involved in Warhammer, and they were like, we should have that. Shut down all animations. Brought it in house. Fucked it. But anyway, that's a great conversation as well. Right, favorite edition.
Are we on to favorite edition? And here's something I think that's I think this is exactly what I would have assumed coming in, and that was 6th edition. There's a lot. I think that's that 30%, or is it 39%, is exactly what this Old World release was targeted at and marketed to. Is their assumption, their working assumption was those are the people that's the game that people liked. We're going to go back and try and make it more like that. However, that does undercut the fact that people still did have love for 7th edition, and a lot of people, like still the full quarter of these people, liked 8th edition. Like 8th edition wasn't a completely despised thing, despite what the internet might say. Although it is worth pointing out that half the players who played until 8th, only half of the players who played all the way to 8th edition said that it was their favorite. So there were a lot of people who were just playing the game looking forward to 9th. That never came. You would have assumed that there was a bunch of people playing 8th edition, and also like Games Workshop was kind of genuinely increasing its popularity over that time period. Like it was becoming a bigger factor, but not what it became. So they would have jumped into 8th edition at that point, and then it would have been a while
until, sorry, hopefully you can't hear the drilling that's happening outside.
Small amount of drilling.
My point, anyway, I was making the point
Yes.
that those people wouldn't have played the previous editions to say something, right?
Oh yeah, true. Like, yeah. So how many people, their first edition was 8th edition? That's a very, very good point.
Yeah.
And also, as you know, Games Workshop's a much smaller company when first, second, third, and starting to grow during fourth, which is why I'm again not surprised to see fourth and fifth on there. That's the early '90s, and that's when Games Workshop's going international. It's transitioning into a corporate monolith. But really, I mean, I think for this cohort, you know, they probably were kids. Like for the people who are filling out the survey, they were probably kids during 6th edition. The remembrance of it, I think, was fun. And also, I know as a fact, 6th edition did live on as a game that people continue to actively play once Fantasy was ended. So again, I'm glad to see, basically my big takeaway here is glad to see 8th edition on there at all.
Okay, it's going to take me a moment to get this final slide up because we don't have a page at the bottom. So just give me a moment. So we can all see that, and then we'll be straight back in a moment. But yeah, this has been fun, and I'm hoping everyone who's watching this is gonna share this around. We'll get some takeaways from it. We'll talk about that at the end. There we go.
I was very all right, and here we go. Here's the games we played. So this is another one I think that when Old World was coming out, I think a lot of people assumed this would be the most destructive for Age of Sigmar, and that it would be the biggest threat for them. And I think that was a fantasy of fantasy players in a lot of ways. But the behemoth of Games Workshop and tabletop gaming in general is 40K. So it makes a lot of sense that if you're a tabletop gamer and you're switching up to another game, you're probably going to be switching up from Warhammer 40K more likely than anything else. So this is the answer to the question: games that you played in the last 3 years. And so 60% of people played Warhammer 40K, and interestingly, other war games is actually ahead of Age of Sigmar, which also speaks to me of the fact that Age of Sigmar is a organically grown player base. I really don't think that Age of Sigmar really has a lot of. There are certainly some, but I would think that the majority of Age of Sigmar players now are Age of Sigmar players. They're not, fantasy players that just played it because that was the next fantasy game that came out. And you do see that too. Just in the unfortunately, my follow-up question to this was brutal, and there's not a lot we could extrapolate from it. Which was basically did the Old World lead you to stop playing any of that same list of games less in the last year? And the biggest number that came out of that was 60% almost of players who did say that they played 40K also said that they're playing 40K less because of the Old World. So to me, that just says that the biggest cannibalization, or like the biggest steal that Old World has been on 40K, which can probably afford it the most. What I was interested to see was that on that follow-up question, there wasn't a massive amount of players identifying Kings of War and Ninth Age and even older editions of Fantasy, and I chalk that up to like maybe them not actually having played them in the last year, really, maybe they'd played it in the last 3 years, but not recently. I think it was a mismatch in the questions. You could probably take that 60% number with a grain of salt too. But these are the games that people were interested in before Old World came out. And at the very least, we know that 60% of the people who answered this survey said that Old World has been their number one game this year.
Very interesting. I mean, it makes sense because we are specifically talking to Old World fans. But yeah, of course. So some pretty interesting details from this survey, all told. But this is just the top line information. And as we've already said, we'd like to deep dive some of these bits in detail. And let us know in the comments below the questions that you want answering. So when you're watching this back, if you're watching this, and do leave comments, like and subscribe and all that stuff. But actually say, Cool, because I've already like written down a couple of ideas for videos I'd like to make in full with Val, where we're talking about some of the bits in kind of extended, which I think would be really fun. Obviously, try and balance that around actually still talking about the game, like talking around the game sometimes can be a pastime that is a bit too much, but like. Because these are all really interesting details, right? And I think a lot of other people will find this so interesting that you'll see videos and stuff made off it as well, right? Which we'd actively encourage. We'd like people to be talking about this because the community being able to share that information, spread that information, and then like learn from it, I guess, is also really healthy.
And I will say that once we have wrung the sponge of content that we're satisfied with, I think it would be rather best to actually just release the information. There's no individual identifying information on it. So certainly the interesting bits of the community, I do intend to release in the future, but not until we get our greasy hands on all the things that we want to talk about. And I'll hopefully bully Rob into doing at least one more episode on some of the more gamer-centric questions here. But there's just a lot of cool stuff that came out of you guys. And I didn't say it at the beginning. I want to say it now. Thank you for participating. Thank you for filling this out. It's really cool and insightful to be able to see. Again, this is a part of the people involved, not everyone. But I know in my 40K life that the second we started actually being able to aggregate data about the way people were playing the game, literal stats from tournaments and events, that was such a massive thing. When you kind of know the shape of it, it doesn't feel like it's just you. And you can see, and you have hard facts that you can now argue about, or data points that you can now talk about or analyze. It just adds a layer to it. And so this kind of a survey, I think, will be fun for hopefully people to chew on and dissect. And I'm sure people will have a lot of fun with it too later on in the future when we drop it.
Yeah, it'd be really fun to see what the response is to this and what people have got to say. But that's all we've got time for today. So I hope you've all enjoyed it. Don't be worried, though. There's going to be lots more stuff coming up from us over the next few weeks. And also, not only that, the lead up and excitement to the build up of Beastmen is also going to be something that we're all super pumped about.
I even read their Grand Army, sir.
Oh, look at you. Do you know at which point you get Primal Fury or not? Do you know when? Which role is it? Do you get Frenzy?
It's a leadership role at some point.
Yes. I've seen
and doubles are involved?
Yeah, I've seen Beastmen players roll it and then say to themselves, what does that mean?
Yeah, maybe we should release a series of game aids for the Beastmen alongside our deep dive of it. But yeah, I do look forward to it. I also had to do some lore reading on the Beastmen to understand them a little bit better too. So I went pretty deep on my vacation on Beastmen.
Oh, fun. All right, lovely. Now, yeah, so massive shout out to the Squarebase community, Squarebase Patreon, everyone who supports the show. It's very much appreciated. Massive love to Val, everyone who did the survey. We'll see you all soon. Thanks very much. Stay based. Goodbye.